Tonight, we're starting off with a look at journalism in Oregon, specifically nonprofit journalism that tries to cover stories that the rest of us miss or just can't get to. I think it's an exciting development, a pushback against all the stories of gloom and doom relating to the profession that I love. And it's our big story tonight. We've decided to take a decent amount of time to talk about this because, well, we love journalists in Oregon, and there's been a lot of loss of journalists in Oregon. So we're going to spend some time paying attention to that. The Oregonian's Mike Rogaway published a chart this summer that really has the depressing news. It highlights the demise of newspaper jobs. This is for all Oregon newspapers. They're on the far left. That's 2001, when there were a total of 4,747 jobs at the papers. Now, look to the far right, 2023, 1,122 jobs. You've probably noticed it with your favorite paper. No matter where you live in Oregon, there are fewer reporters, fewer stories. The TV business so far has not had the same type of drain, but audience habits are shifting for us as well, and the number of you watching us generally is going down over time. But tonight, we're going to focus on the papers. In an effort to fight the brain drain, the owner of Willamette Week is launching a new nonprofit news operation. They're calling it the Oregon Journalism Project. It'll be run by Willamette Week's Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter Nigel Jaquist, and they are going to ask philanthropists to pay for it. I had a chance to ask Nigel about that recently.
We've been very clear with people that we would like to have their money, but there can be no strings attached. And I think that if anybody who knows Willamette Week knows that we will go after any story without fear or favor, and that many of the people that we have written about over the years have been people that we might philosophically agree with or agree with their politics, but when they need to be held accountable, we have held them accountable. So I don't have any concern. I think we've shown over and over again that we will, if there's a story there, we'll go after it no matter who it involves.
Like to hear that. It's normal these days for nonprofit newsrooms, by the way, to ask for donations to fund their work. We'll get into that more in a bit. Oregon Journalism Project will launch this fall. Jaquist says it's a direct answer to the lack of reporters statewide.
We've seen across the board, in Salem, in Eugene, in Portland, in Medford, Pendleton, Ontario, every newspaper and news organization is much smaller than it was 10 years ago and vastly smaller than it was 20 years ago. That's no slight to any of those publications, including the Oregonian, which continues to do great work, but it's undeniable that even the Oregonian, which remains the state's largest newsroom, is far smaller than it once was. And that's not their fault. It's the industry that we're in. It's the migration of advertising from old methods to the internet, which has cost us all significant revenue. So this isn't about somebody else doing a bad job. It's about the loss of capacity across the state in every county, in every city, and are wanting to provide some kind of a watchdog service to shed light on things that should be better, that should be more accountable.
Now, another famous investigative reporter in Oregon is Les Zeitz. He owns the Malheur Enterprise newspaper. He's a two-time Pulitzer finalist and five-time winner of Oregon's top investigative reporting award. So he knows his business, and he's worked on huge stories at the Oregonians for 25 years. He agrees there are still many stories to find and tell.
Well, the short answer is yes. I think that's true, probably even in Portland. Well, the short answer is yes. I think that's true. Probably even in Portland, there aren't as many reporters as there used to be. So there are stories going untold in Oregon's largest city. But the principle then ought to be, how do we best use what journalistic resources there are in Oregon to tell the most important stories for the most people? Now, in Southern Oregon, on the coast, in Eastern Oregon, are there things going on that the local communities don't know about or are poorly informed about? You bet. And what's the impact of that? People don't engage. They can't hold public officials accountable. They can't question how their kids are being schooled or how the police are doing their work. So I think part of the solution in Oregon is to figure out what is the news that people want, and how do we, as a collective profession, find a new way to deliver that information.
Here's another journalist I'm introducing you to, Lee Vandervoo. She's a journalist who's worked for digital newsrooms for the last 15 years and is respected by print journalists across Oregon. She believes she and her business partner have figured out a way to deliver that digital news. In 2025, they plan to launch a digital nonprofit newsroom focused on the Columbia River Gorge. It'll be called Uplift Local. They will send it out in part through text messages.
I think that when nonprofit digital newsrooms started to develop in 2009, 2010, it was a lot of upstart folks who were recognizing the decline of the traditional newsroom and just kicking the tires on new things and trying to see what would work. I think now nonprofit newsrooms really are more targeted. They're either serving specific demographics or geographies or filling particular subject matter gaps. I think generally they're there to close longstanding, sometimes emerging news gaps, and to just fill in the blanks where local newsrooms may have declined.
Okay. And what about your guys' effort? What is that going to be focused on?
Yeah, at Uplift Local, we are focused on addressing news gaps in Oregon. We're providing new digital tools and services in areas that don't have local news, either because they've been underserved to begin with or are now. We've done a lot of research in Oregon. We've talked to 3,500 individuals in 4 different languages, and we've identified news gaps to be rural areas that don't have local news or sufficient local news, people who prefer to receive news and information in language other than English, and culturally distinct communities who may not be getting relevant news.
So a lot of work being done there. Vandervoo adds that the digital nonprofits are typically tiny compared to traditional newsrooms. She points to operations like the Lund Report, which specializes in health news for Oregon and Southwest Washington. Also Investigate West, which she worked at, and it focuses on communities throughout the Northwest and focuses on the environment, government, and corporate accountability and more. Now, while some of the nonprofit newsrooms work alone, Nigel Jaquist says the Oregon Journalism Project is going to expand its reach by working with other newsrooms and taking Willamette Week's approach to watchdog journalism statewide.
The owner of Willamette Week, the longtime editor, Mark Zussman, has been spending a lot of time with other publications around the state. I think he's got 18 papers that are excited about running stories from the Oregon Journalism Project. So our goal, Pat, is to look for the kind of stories around the state outside the metro area that Willamette Week has done for decades, and to try and publish those with local partners, to sometimes work with local reporters when appropriate, and to try and shine a light on things that are happening in different parts of Oregon that are not getting covered right now.
So that's pretty exciting. However, there's a lot going on, but then there's the question of funding. These things run through subscriptions and donations. So is there enough money in the philanthropy world to keep them all going? Les Zeitz worries that the nonprofit field for journalism in Oregon is getting crowded. He has a keen interest in the issue. Besides owning the Malheur paper, he also runs the Oregon Capital Chronicle. That's a nonprofit news operation based in Salem that focuses on state government and politics.
Well, look, any initiative to try and rebuild journalism in Oregon is a good initiative. My concern is that we've got like 3 different projects underway in Oregon under different nonprofits that all seem to be sort of aiming at the same thing of trying to fill in news gaps around the state. And I just worry that in a small state with not a lot of donors, that the efforts are going to be spread too thin and the results are going to be too inadequate for what we need to do in Oregon.
So something to keep in mind. Lee Vandervoo with Uplift Local, though, believes there is plenty of donor money to go around and that interest is growing nationwide.
In the last year, we've seen institutional philanthropies around the country who have had an interest in journalism really mobilize around this issue of local news gaps. There's a lot more of an understanding that when people don't get local news and information, it really seeds and feeds disinformation, misinformation, polarizing narratives, And it is having a huge effect on civic participation and people's ability to like engage meaningfully in the systems that affect their lives every day. So we've seen folks who are interested in putting funds in journalism put together $500 million to strengthen local newsrooms, close longstanding gaps, and advance public policy that benefits people who want to access local news, and make those investments pretty deliberately in this space. That's very new. We've also seen 25 chapters of that effort called Press Forward stand up local efforts in communities around the country that are adding hundreds of millions of dollars to that pool specifically for local news. So there's tons of new resources in the space. And in Oregon, we do not have a local chapter yet, but we certainly have a lot of new interest in philanthropy, in news, and in the polarizing and the polarizing narratives in the misinformation that are taking the space of what civic discourse used to be when we had more local news.
Now, I know that was a deep dive on nonprofit news organizations, but I thought it was fascinating to learn about how the approach to news is changing, and I wanted to bring you along on the journey. Now, it's your turn. What do you think about all that? I know you like news, or you wouldn't be watching this live or later on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Are you aware of these nonprofit sites that I mentioned in the story? Would you be interested in contributing to one or more of the organizations? I'm not fundraising, I'm just wondering what your thoughts are. Send us your thoughts. The email address is thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail. The number is 503-226-5090. I look forward to hearing from you.